to have you join us here a little early on Friday morning. My name is Dr. Amy Crowley. I am a associate professor here in the CMHC online program in the Counselor Education Department of the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. I am very happy to be presenting today with one of our PhD doctoral students from our Counselor Education and Supervision program. And just to kind of give you a real brief introduction to who I am, here at the department, one of the responsibilities I have is I am the chapter faculty advisor for Pride Plus, our online student organization that works to meet the needs of the LGBTQ community, as well as those needing and seeking out education. So Heather, would you like to introduce yourself before we move on?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Heather Deshane, and like she stated, I am a PhD student in the Counselor Education and Supervision Department here at the Chicago School. I completed my master's program with the Chicago School 2 years ago, and I'm now a resident in counseling in the state of Virginia, and I will hopefully be finishing my hours in a little over a month, and get licensed. I'm very excited about that. I work as a certified substance abuse counselor in a psychiatric hospital here in Virginia. So I do apologize if you hear the overhead speakers. I'm doing this from an office in the hospital. So I'll mute as much as I can. But I work in the partial hospitalization program here. They are all outpatient, but still kind of like mildly acute with their drug and alcohol use. But I love what I do here. It's wonderful work, and I have awesome staff that I work with and patients here. And yeah, that's it. I think I'm in year 2 of my program now, about to start. I'm doing the whole dissertation process, which Dr. Crowley is my dissertation chair, so she's along on this ride with me as well. It's been fun so far.
Fun, such a good word for it. All right. So just to briefly go over our objectives for today, we would hope that by the end of our presentation today, attendees will be able to identify themes related to LGBTQ plus students' experiences in higher education. The attendees will understand how these experiences impact pedagogy in higher education, and that attendees will be able to define a supportive environment for LGBTQ plus students in higher education settings. All right. So, Heather?
Hi. So we wanted to start off by talking a little bit about our own personal journeys and stories, and highlight the importance of what it means to be identifying as LGBTQ plus in the higher education community. So for me, I come from a very rural, small town in North Carolina, where essentially it was looked down upon, or there was a lot of prejudice and discrimination towards anyone who wasn't considered white, heteronormative, cisgender, etc. So I was very concealed when I was in high school. So when I went off to undergrad, I went about 3 hours away to this this wonderful town in North Carolina called Wilmington that is very open, tolerant, and liberal. And that's where I really started to exploring more about who I was as an individual. And so this is where I got to meet more people who identified as LGBTQ. And at that point, I kind of figured out that I was probably bisexual. Graduated from there. I took a long time off before I came back for my grad experience. I took about 10 years off between those two degrees. And when I came into my graduate program, one of the things I noticed was that there was a lot more visibility and a lot more representation of the LGBTQ community at the Chicago School than there was at my undergrad. And this really made me feel very comforted that there were people like me who existed in this educational world and this academic world. So I felt more comfortable being who I am. And so having, representation like that really mattered to me. And then going through like my coursework and doing a lot of that self-reflection process really helped me. As far as the coming out process for me, it was challenging, especially with my family. There was some non-acceptance, there was some acceptance, but one thing I noticed with my school colleagues and professors and faculty was a lot of welcoming and warmth, which really helped me in my own personal identity development to grow, further and becoming more comfortable in who I am. Over the last few years, I've kind of been exploring my sexuality more and have kind of come to the conclusion that I identify as a queer woman. So I'm attracted to kind of whoever, people in general. So I think a lot of people I didn't use that as like pansexual, but I use the word queer because I feel like it's kind of an umbrella term that kind of encompasses more. And so for me, it's more about who the person is and, that genuine connection that I have with people versus what's going on downstairs or anything like that. None of that is important to me. And as far as professional identity, as I moved into my doc program, I knew that working with the LGBTQ population was something that was going to be really important for me because of my own identity personally. So I sought out spaces where I knew I would be accepted. And so Dr. Crowley and I last spring started talking about me coming on board as the doctoral advisor for Pride Plus, which I was very excited about. I remember her coming to our practicum class and saying, we're looking for doc advisors for these two student groups. And I immediately messaged her and was like, I want Pride Plus. And she was like, well, yes, obviously. And it's been a really wonderful experience for the last, little over a year, creating this space for other students, other faculty to come and feel comfortable to express who they are. So.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. So as I mentioned earlier, I am Dr. Crowley. A little bit of background on my process has included I grew up in a family that was exposed to diversity on a regular basis. My dad was in the Navy. So we lived around diversity, we existed around diversity, and it was just never really a question in my mind that anything that I presented to my family would be accepted. When I came out to my family at the age of 14 as bisexual, the response I got was, okay, well, we prefer if you married a man, but whatever. And it was never really brought up again. And, in some ways that during that era, which was the 1990, it was very much like a welcome, like, okay, well, at least we're not making a big deal out of it. All throughout high school, I would date both girls and boys. And again, never a question from my family, even as I went off to college, bringing home girlfriends, boyfriends, again, no questions from my family. I did get my first undergrad degree from University of Maryland in Baltimore, so again, exposed to a great deal of diversity. However, when I decided to get a second undergrad degree, I had moved to be a little bit closer to my sister, who at the time had three children, and was a single mom. And so in doing so, I got my second undergrad degree at a much, much smaller university in South Central Pennsylvania that was located right in the heart of Amish country. So I often joke and say that, the little town that surrounded our university included three things: churches, bars, and pizza shops. And that was pretty much it. In fact, the closest, we did have a local grocery store, but the closest chain grocery store or Walmart was almost 30 minutes away. So it was just a really rural, lacking diversity area. But again, I just kind of kept doing my thing. I found that, my group of people at college, and I did spend a good bit of time with some of my friends in Pittsburgh. So I I sort of was used to the city life and wanted to be around a more progressive and an area that had a lot more to do, just in general. So I got my master's degree from the same university. And it was really during these times where I started to realize how difficult it was for students to find their group of people. If they weren't actively out there seeking them out, if they weren't open and out about their gender identity and sexual orientation, it could be a little more challenging for them. And so even as a master's level student, I would kind of scratch my head wondering, what this was about. I would ask some of my faculty members. I did have a out faculty member in my master's program. And his response was always like, it's just a small community. It's just a small community. And it's like, well, but we have students from all over. And so I think that it's important that we meet those needs. And he was like, yeah, this may not be the school for that. So I was kind of dismayed by that quite a bit. And then when I went to my doctoral program, I was in the very first hybrid KSEC accredited PhD program. And in doing so, we did spend a good bit of time on campus. However, that time spent on campus was generally spent in intensive residencies. So we didn't really do a lot of socializing. And instead, we did a lot of academic work, a lot of teaching, a lot of supervision. So we didn't have a group at that time. However, I really advocated for the opportunity. So I spent time working with some of the school administrators on how to sort of build community and connection amongst students in general. And I started with what was determined to be a safer topic, and that was substance abuse. So I did a lunch and learn series that lasted 12 weeks, and it addressed the basics of the different categories of substances. And what it did is it sort of set this precedence of this is something that the school's offering. It's an opportunity to come eat your lunch, hang out with some peers, and hear a talk. And from there, I was able then to move into LGBTQ issues. And it was a little, according to the school, it was accepted because of the transition process that we went through. Unfortunately, that school is not open anymore. And so the system, lost its grounding there. But what I did carry with me was this idea that, we need to actively work to create these spaces for students. So as a new professor, it was very important to me when I came to work here at the Chicago School. And I told my department chair at the time that the only way I was going to come was if I could be authentic and genuine and be myself. And she was like, well, what does that actually mean? And I said, well, sometimes my hair might be blue. I don't want to have to cover my tattoos. And I want to be able to talk about my family the way my family is. And she said, sure, no problem. And so I've been here at the Chicago School for 6 years. I was the first out faculty member in our department. To this day, I, kind of pride myself in the fact that I remain very authentic. And my family has really reflected some changes over the years. As I said earlier, I came out at the age of 14 as identifying as a bisexual woman. And early fall, late summer last year, my spouse came out as a transgender man. So in the process of that, I have spent the last 9 months, almost 10 months now, really looking at my own journey and identifying my sexual orientation as I was previously married to a man, and the world saw me as a heterosexual individual. And then my second marriage, I married a woman, and the world saw me as a lesbian. Yet neither one of those identities really fit me. So I've always kind of felt like I fought for my bisexual identification because it can be very closeted, it can be very masked, it can be very hidden. And so now I've been on a journey to sort of re-examine that. And what does that mean as I'm learning to discover identities that may fit for me. The representation of students, and Heather is a student that's mentioned this before, as well as others, is when we go to residencies, it's really important to me that our very diverse student population can look up at our faculty members and see themselves. I think the department's done a good job of hiring diversity amongst our faculty, And I am very happy to be a representation of that. And I know Heather has previously shared, like she loved being able to look up and see me with my tattoos showing, because for her that meant, hey, if she can do it, I can do it. So again, I don't hide that part of me. Obviously, my hair is blue, so you can't really hide that. And then I am very open and expressive about my family and our makeup, as well as my own orientation and gender identity. And then, as Heather said, really the safety of our students, even the safety of my other faculty members, is really important to me. I want to make sure that they know that there are safe spaces, there are safe individuals. And, I often say I really wish that we had safe zone indicators for our Zoom rooms, so that people knew when they joined that, oh, wait a minute, this is a safe person, much like they would if they came to my in-person office. So instead, what I do, and today or this week, my background is of Disney, is I change my Zoom background every single week, something I've done for years. I can't even tell you, but I do try to work in things like rainbow colors, or during Pride Month, I get a whole bunch of really cool Pride backgrounds. And so that when students do come in to meet with me, that they see, oh, this is what Dr. Crowley is about, because those little nuances can really make a difference. And then finally, advocacy. So this is also really important to me as a person who recognizes my own privilege. I can pass as a heterosexual individual, cisgender. I am Caucasian. I am a well-educated and in a higher socioeconomic status. So because of all of that, I recognize my privilege, and I want to use that privilege to do things like advocate for our community. And so I have attended letter writing campaigns previously. I know Christine is here and has done quite a bit of that here in the state of Florida. I also was the founding president of what is currently called LGBTQ. It is the Florida chapter of SAGE. And I know that Christina has also been involved in leadership with that. So it's wonderful to see her here. But to me, all of that was opportunities to advocate. I've been to the Capitol, I've been to DC, and done legislative work. So I recognize that while I'm also a member of the community, I need to use my levels of privilege to help others within the community. So, all right.
Yeah, I remember being very excited seeing you at residency and being like, oh my gosh, her hair is so cool and she has tattoos, and oh, that means I can just be my genuine self and I can have tattoos and whatnot. And I've been an advocate for that in like workspaces before. In my previous job, when I interviewed there for an internship, my hair was very colorful and I had it just put up into a bun and was very professional. And I got told that because of the work that we were doing, which it was an outpatient substance abuse treatment, that I had to change my hair and it had to be natural colors. And that I had to cover my tattoos. And that made me really sad, but I needed an internship for my master's program. And I had been really, really struggling to find something at that point. And substance abuse was what I wanted to do. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to take it and kind of suck it up. But I advocated really, really hard on behalf of not just me, but other counselors that work there, to be able to, have our tattoos on display and, be ourselves. And they okayed it. They were okay with it. They were like, yeah, okay. I mean, it's not hurting anyone. And I actually found that, especially with that population, it kind of like helped the relationship in a lot of ways. They saw me as, very relatable and normal. So they're like, oh, you have cool tattoo. And some of them who wouldn't even like talk would start opening up because they were like, oh, what's that tattoo on your arm? What does that mean? And so it would kind of just, start a whole conversation. It was nice. So I love being able to do advocacy work like that. Okay, so the first thing we wanted to talk about is some of the themes that are relevant to students' experiences in higher education. So this is for anyone who's in any type of higher education program. So this could be at the bachelor's, master's, or doc level. And what I found from this resource, English and Finby Halls from 2019, were some pretty predominant themes that talked about environments and exclusion, assumptions, stereotypes, visibility, and support system. So what this means is that students reported environments that were typically very heteronormative and cisnormative, where binary gender assumptions were often the norm. Some of the students from the study said that their departments were more welcoming, but other departments were not. There was a culture that was just very lacking of being inclusive. And then there were some that even reported that there was aggressive or isolating behavior. And one student even reported being asked by another student to engage in a threesome after finding out that student's sexual orientation, which is extremely inappropriate and does not promote a safe space. The assumptions, there's just this persistent assumption of individual sexuality or gender. When the needs of LGBTQ plus students come up, generalizations tended to occur. There were no discussions around how identifying as LGBTQ plus intersects with other parts of the students' identities, and there tended to just be a lot of focus on sexuality or gender identity, and that was it. From that particular study, they had about 200 participants. 67 of them experienced stereotyping of some sort. Just under half of the students had experienced jokes, homophobic or inappropriate jokes. So a lot of just inappropriate comments about who they are. Visibility, some of the respondents in the studies indicated that a lack of role models contributed to a perception that academia as a whole was lacking in regard to inclusion and diversity on campus. So because they didn't have professors like Dr. Crowley who look like them or who are from the community, that made them very hesitant to be who they were and be comfortable. A lot of them stated that they want to see successful faculty and staff from this community. Increased LGBTQ plus visibility can impact positively professional development of students, and in turn have a positive effect on health and well-being of that student. If they're seeing other people like them succeed, it contributes to their own sense of success. And then lastly, just support systems, and this is pretty straightforward, I think, like just lack of social support, poor supervisory relationships, and a lack of a sense of belonging, either in a department or on the campus in whole, can have the students feeling burnt out, emotionally exhausted, and this can lead to not completing the program. So you lose students. So what is it like to transition to university environments as an LGBTQ plus student? Well, it's a dynamic, ongoing process that includes educational, social, and psychological components. And so educational is just those academic transitions, getting used to the coursework, the rigorous demands, having motivation to learn the subject matter. Is it something I'm interested in versus not interested? Social is building those connections with your peers and classmates, engaging in personal or sexual relationships with others. And then psychological is just accessing support from counseling services, being able to discuss sexuality or gender identities, and whether to disclose this with peers. So this transition can be exciting and worrying. Exciting in that we're coming to a whole new environment and yay, this is fun, but also worrying because is this a campus culture or climate where I am safe and I can be who I am? So some of the things from this article, Glazard et al. From 2020, pointed out that sometimes accommodations itself can be unwelcoming or hostile, such as dorms, that there could be homophobic bullying in dorm rooms, anti-gay graffiti and sentiments written in bathrooms or on walls, and even inappropriate responses by schools in regard to negative behavior. And that a lot of times they would remove the victim from the dorm and place them somewhere else rather than the perpetrator. Um, Curriculum itself,
Heather, I'm going to stop you real quick just because I wanted to make a note about that first
yeah.
point that you said about the accommodations is one of the events that I can remember occurring when I was getting my second undergrad degree was a friend of mine who identified as a lesbian was really encountering difficulty in her dorm setting because nobody wanted to room with her. And so, and of course, this time frame, and, I'm hoping that many universities have progressed beyond this, but it was an assumption that females would room with females. And so as an individual who came from from Pittsburgh, where it was much more progressive, she was already out to her family, she was out in high school. She came into college with the identity of being out was the norm for her. And yet being out caused her difficulties with her roommates. And she had sort of a strain of roommates that were trying to move out of the room with her. And she would be like, I'm not even attracted to these individuals. But it was just simply based upon judgments made about their own identity.
And Crystal in the chat stated that at her undergrad, people would avoid the dorm that she was in because it was called the gay dorm. I grew up in North Carolina, so there's a lot of stereotypes. And we had the North Carolina school system had UNC Greensboro, which often went by UNC Gay. Or UNCG because UNC Gay, because it had a very well-known what's the word I'm looking for? Like culture of being very LGBTQ plus accepting. And so a lot of gay and lesbian students went there because it was so open. Greensboro in itself was a very open, or still is a very open town. So I just remember it being called UNC Gay when I was growing up. But in my little rural town where I was from, that was a bad thing. If you went there, clearly you were gay. And I was like, okay, so what if I am? But I couldn't be that person in high school. So I just remember it being very unwelcoming in high school. But curriculum, like I was saying, is courses tend to be kind of very heteronormative. Higher education curriculums don't always address issues around LGBTQ plus equality. And from this study, it was really funny because they described the curriculum at some of their colleges as, quote, pale, male, and stale. I thought that was a wonderful quote. I was like, that has to go in there, pale, male, and stale, because I have found that that is accurate for some campuses. LGBTQ issues are invisible in health-related courses. They don't talk about, sexual orientation or safe sex within that community. And only some universities celebrate having a Pride Month or have any type of commitment to diversity at all. And then last, for like campus climate, students should understand the responsibilities of promoting inclusion, diversity, and equality. There can be a climate of fear on campuses where students don't feel comfortable sharing their sexual identity. I already talked a little bit about homophobia in like the dorm rooms or just in courses in general. Students who identified as transgender have reported higher rates of harassment. And having to come out consistently to new groups of people can cause anxiety, and coming out around peers that have exhibited anti-gay attitudes in the past can prove to be very challenging. So students might conceal their sexual orientation altogether and just not talk about it. And so that is a concealment of their identity and who they are. But on the flip side of that, when we have safe, nurturing environments, LGBTQ plus students can explore and develop their identities and really thrive and develop really positive personal and professional identities. All right, so the minorities stress model, I included this in here because I think it's important that we as counselors and educators and supervisors recognize how minority stress affects those who are from marginalized populations. So minority stress this model was developed by Meyer in 2003, and it essentially states that those who are from minority populations tend to experience stress, more stress than those who are from non-minority or non-marginalized populations. And this is because there's lack of support, stigma, discrimination, prejudice, and lots of different things. So the stress model is three things. It's unique, chronic, and socially based. And what this means is that it's unique in that these individuals experience different types of stressors. So the adaptation process is higher than heteronormative or cisgender people. There's just more stress to overcome. Chronic because it's underlying social and cultural structures that are perpetuated constantly, these negative social messages that we receive. And then socially based because of social processes, institutions, and structures beyond the individual itself that are contributing. So for example, in my research for one of the other presentations I did this week, in 2020, there were over 100 anti-trans bills within the country. And that was 2 years ago. So a lot could have changed between now and then. So that's what we mean by socially based. It goes on to describe kind of the distal proximal distinction, meaning that distal stressors are these objective events and conditions that happen outside of the person individually, whereas proximal things are personal processes. So concealment, their own personal identity, and also their subjective, and it relies on perception. So are there expectations of an event that's coming up that I can be who I am or I can't be who I am? How vigilant do I need to be about my spaces? And then there's also like internalization, such as like internalizing negative societal values or attitudes of ourselves. And then this is that model itself. So I'll go over this really briefly. So on the left-hand side, it's basically just stating that there are circumstances within the environment along with minority status and minority identity that contribute to general stressors, minority stress processes, and for distal and proximal. And all three of these together contribute to mental health outcomes, either negative or positive. And then, of course, if there's coping and social support involved from both the community and the individual, there tends to be more favorable outcomes. Whereas if that is not as strong, then there's going to be unfavorable mental health outcomes. So this whole model takes into consideration all of the things that are going on with this person, their status, their identity, and all of their stressors.
All right, so just to touch a little bit on implications for pedagogy, the first point there is program structure. So one of the things to be mindful of is a lot of times master's level programs are designed specifically to meet K-CREP requirements. And in that, K-CREP currently does not have specific indicators or requirements for addressing LGBTQ issues within a class. They do talk about multiculturalism and they do talk about diversity, but they don't specify LGBTQ+. And so in that, many universities do not touch, or they briefly touch on the topic. Other programs will incorporate classes regarding LGBTQ population. And generally what I've seen is these come in the form of electives. So while they may not be a core curriculum course, they are elective courses that students can choose to take. At the Chicago School, we currently do not have a course specific to the LGBTQ population. Myself and another faculty member have been working on designing a course that would be considered a special topics elective. And if it does show popularity, it may be adopted as an optional elective for our program.
Dr. Crowley, can I mention something about that?
Absolutely.
Is this too long to type? I was actually helping Dr. Troutman gather up data on like courses, K-prep accredited schools that offer LGBTQ plus courses, and it really is astonishing to see that there's not a lot. Like in the state of Texas, there's like about 29 schools, and I think maybe 2 of them offered courses for LGBTQ plus community. So it's really astonishing to see that there really isn't a lot of courses out there, not even as an elective, or that they group the population into human sexuality courses. And that to me was like, it bothered me so much. In one school, I think they had it under like neuropsychology, and I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, why is it in that department? I don't know. It was something I just found super disturbing, and I just kind of wanted to add to the point that you were making, that there really aren't a lot of courses offered for this particular population in counseling.
No, and I appreciate you sharing that, Crystal. And Dr. Chapman's the other faculty member that's working on this elective course. So it is very discouraging. And I have a colleague who teaches at a brick and mortar school in Ohio, and he actually teaches LGBTQ electives in the clinical mental health counseling program. And I always tell him how jealous I am of him. Because I appreciate his school and his program's advocacy for the inclusion of such a course. And yet, as Crystal said, other programs, it's just non-existent. Here in our program, when I first came, the human sexuality course had only been taught twice. And when I was sort of reviewing the curriculum as the faculty member from Florida, I was astounded at how heavy it was on LGBTQ topics, which I appreciated. I really did. And that, it was our program's attempt to try to include LGBTQ into our curriculum, but it doesn't equate human sexuality. And so, I can remember talking to my department chair at the time and just saying, I feel really bad because I need to stand up and say, hey, this isn't okay. While I want you to address the community and its topics important to the community, I don't want you to equate our community with sexuality because that's not what our community is. And through some conversations, I was able to advocate for some content changes in that class. It was a little bit easier in that particular class because it was an elective. So one of the things I did want to mention is that we here at the Chicago School in the online CMHC program, we hold the national curriculum for all CMHC programs in the Chicago school system. But what that means is in order for us to do curriculum changes, it has to go through a national curriculum committee. So because our department approves the changes doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be implemented, because the other departments also have to approve the same changes. So there have been some committees working very hard to increase diverse representation across all of our classes in the national curriculum model. And classes that I know have been targeted for this, of course, would be diversity and multiculturalism, couples and family class, lifespan development, assessment, career. I'm sure there's quite a few others I'm not remembering, but and so while we are working to implement it across the curriculum, it is a very lengthy process from a higher education perspective. So I'm not super excited about our human sexuality courses curriculum currently, but it is so much better than it used to be. And so I really do have a hope that as we get the LGBTQ elective developed, I can work to move more of that content out of human sexuality and into the elective, and then have the human sexuality elective actually focus on human sexuality itself. So readings and resources are another area where inclusiveness is really important. So when we look at the options that are being provided to students, either as required readings or meta learning opportunities, we want to make sure that we are including LGBTQ resources, research as an option for our students. We don't want to just say, oh, well, if you find one, good luck, but we actually want to be doing the work to provide that for our students. It is important that curricula allows for alternative ideas and approaches, that we are accepting that for some students, as they're working in, say, couples and family class and they're learning to define family, that we also recognize that family is not mother, father, 2.5 kids, a dog, a cat, a white picket fence. And so that we are allowing students to, create that structure that fits for them. Because as I said, my family is very unique in many ways. I also, in my home, have a friend that lives with me who is 71, and my ex-husband lives with us. So outwardly, we're a really interesting looking family. Yet internally, when people ask about our dynamics, it's like, oh, that makes sense. That like takes co-parenting to a whole new level. And, it takes a village to raise children. I do have 3 children. And so with there being so many adults in my house, also dogs, I'm not sure what that's about, but it does really assist in sort of developing that sense of family around my kids. Yet one of the individuals, my friend who's 71, my kids consider a grandmother, and yet she's not actually related to them in any way, shape, or form. So, it's just important that we allow for that and understand that all of our students have very diverse experiences. Delivery of material is also really important. So understanding that we don't want to just, say, oh, there's resources out there, but we want to actively seek to provide those to our students. We want to be bringing them up in lectures. We want to be highlighting them in the work that we're doing with students. We also want to, again, make sure we're representing diversity, and that diversity isn't just an identity as an LGBTQ individual, but also the intersectionalities of multiple identities. Because the reality is, if we sit back and reflect on our own, we all have multiple identities that intersect, yet we are not necessarily providing the same resources, the same research, the same delivery of material, or even course content that addresses intersectionality. I was having a conversation with a colleague about that, and I said, I've had students in our diversity class say, what is intersectionality? And I'm like, well, why haven't you heard this in one of your prior classes? But that's the reality. And then, of course, safe zones. I think it's really important as we are, thinking about our delivery of information. I post an announcement in every class I teach that addresses the importance of our classroom being a safe zone, and that this is an opportunity for students to try things out, to learn, to falter, to make mistakes, and to not be shamed for that. I would much rather students have that opportunity in my classroom than for it to be delayed and them not get to that point until they're sitting in front of a client and not know what to do. All right, so what steps can you take? I am aware that we are going to be running out of time here shortly, so I'm going to try to speed through this as quickly as I can. But one of the first things that you can do, and this goes for those that are students, those that may be, education providers, staff, supports in a program, is identify the needs. What is lacking? Is it lacking from a global perspective, campus-wide? Is it through housing? Is it through student support services, the counseling center, different programs, the curriculum within the programs, but really do a needs assessment. Also look at what currently exists. So, while we are here talking about some of the deficits in higher education when it comes to the LGBTQ community, the reality is that some schools are doing an amazing job with this. And so we need to know what exists on our campuses. We need to know what exists in other campuses so that we know what direction we want to move in. Identify what can be improved. And that does take a realistic perspective, because we may have a lot of ambitions and then maybe a lot of things we want to see change, but it may not necessarily be feasible at this time. And then who can be included? And for me, this has always been really important, is recognizing that there are so many different levels within our university systems, and we need to include them all. So understanding that administration has a huge role in what is and isn't provided to our students. So while there might be many levels in between administration at our universities and our students themselves, we do need to bring all voices to the table. We also want to look at department leadership. We want to look at faculty. We want to look at doctoral students, master's students, bachelor's level students, and how they can all come together and really assist in this process. We want to evaluate what resources are out there, what resources are available, who they're available to. So there are times when we have resources that are geared specifically for students, but not necessarily accessible to faculty, or who are intended for faculty, but administration don't access them. So really understanding what is out there university-wide, what's available in your department specifically, within your department, what's available in your program. You can see how I'm going from the macro to the micro level here. What's available within the classroom, how much power and control you as a faculty member have, and what's available in your classroom, and how much influence can you as a student have on what's being provided in the classrooms you're in. One of the things our department does do is we have students who advise our curriculum committee. And so I always encourage students who have questions about course content to take it there. Go to our curriculum committee, tell them what you feel is lacking, what you would like to see included, because the voice of the student is heard so much louder than the voice of a faculty member. And so if students are recognizing that there needs to be inclusion, then we want to listen to that. We want to hear that from them. And then evaluate resources available in your community. Don't hesitate to reach out to those around you, organizations, associations, other professionals who may be able to come in and assist you, even though they're not part of your university system. So don't discount what's available in your community either. It is important to develop a network, and this would be for students, this would be for faculty members, is have your support system, have your tribe, have your people around you. This includes faculty, students, and off-campus organizations. I previously mentioned the Pride Plus student group that I'm the chapter faculty advisor for. And this group was started along with some students who really we all had a drive and ambition to see how we could meet the needs of the LGBTQ student population we had, as well as providing those opportunities for education and resources. And so we really developed this network where we were all working together to get the group off the ground and running. And then taking action, working to advocate for developing inclusive policies, advocating for healthcare and counseling resources on campus. So, I remember my second undergrad university, when you would go to the student health department, they would have information about safe sex, and it was always very cisgender heteronormative. And I would chuckle a little bit because I would be like, I guess, as a gay individual, you don't have to practice safe sex, or we don't want to, talk about how we practice safe sex. But these are really important conversations, and even just through marketing material hanging in the waiting room or a pamphlet on a table can speak volumes to the individuals who go there. Fund co-curricular campus programming. I did have to do a little bit of legwork here at the university in order to get the Pride Plus group approved. However, we were able to and even open it up to the entire online campus community. So not just our department, not just our program, but any online student at the Chicago school system. And our online campus is the largest campus that the Chicago school system has. So we've worked really hard to, get the support that we need in order to have the group up and running. And then offer faculty development. And this is an area that I'm currently working on with the Chicago School. I have a few other colleagues in the field that are really helping to advocate for the need for funding for research, the need for grant funding to support students and faculty attending workshops, trainings, and conferences on LGBTQ topics. And so from a school administrative perspective, really working with your administrators on making sure that there are funds available for that is vital to not only faculty members being able to deliver material to our students, but also our students' ability to be exposed to the material that they need. So, all right, and I know we're almost out of time. So real quick, just wanting to define supportive versus unsupportive environments. And we've talked about most of this throughout the presentation. The supportive are what is available in our campus counseling centers. So I utilize a lot of safe zone education here as well, is like, what we have that is applicable to our high school level, we can also modify and make applicable to our collegiate level. And so making sure that the campus counseling centers are inclusive of all diversity is going to be important. Looking at the formal interactions between students and faculty, what's happening in the classroom, what's happening out of the classroom, maybe through advising, maybe through committee work or student associations, what type of interactions are happening, and are we encouraging faculty and students to connect around topics of diversity? And then there's informal interactions between students and faculty, looking for visibility amongst faculty, students, faculty attending Pride Month activities, faculty being encouraged or supported in wearing Pride clothing that denotes them as safe or a member of the community. I have a little pin on my bag that I carry back and forth to work, which right now really doesn't mean much during COVID, but it says "You're safe with me." And it's just a little pin and it's just on my bag, but those little things that I can put out there that show that you can be safe, you can talk with me, that I'm judgment free, or I work to be judgment free, can really make a difference for a student who's struggling. And then understanding those unsupportive environments where there's underrepresentation or no representation, a lack of access to healthcare and counseling, a lack of spaces for LGBTQ students who are looking to explore who they are, what their identity is, and even just learn. Our community is constantly changing. We're constantly evolving and growing. Even the term queer. When I was young, queer was a derogatory term. And even today, I find myself leaning more towards that identity, but still kind of struggling with some internal feelings about it because I'm still taken back to coming to terms with my identity in the late 80s and the gay community being the sole cause of AIDS in our country. And so really having that queer term be used as a means of putting someone down. And then being mindful of the inclusive language and curriculum in our schools and our programs. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to stop there because we are out of time. But I do want to say thank you to everyone who joined us. I believe the survey link was placed in the chat, so make sure that you take time to do that, especially if you're looking for CEUs. And otherwise, please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or concerns. And thank you again for attending today. I hope everyone has a wonderful Friday.
Thank you very much, you guys.
Bye.